All right, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Melinda Rogers. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Justice, and I am going to be serving as the moderator for this session. Today, we are going to take a look back at the progress we've made towards the National Cybersecurity Strategy and Implementation Plan, take stock of what our vision was about a year ago when we first published the document, and compare it to the progress that we've made thus far. And joining me on stage are my esteemed colleagues. I am going to start with the OGs from last year, who joined me last year. First is Liesl Franz, Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Cyberspace Security, U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. Liesl, nice to see you. Right next to Liesl, we have Eric Goldstein, Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Eric, nice to see you.
Good to be here.
And we have one of our newbies, although she's well-versed in the subject, deep in knowledge, Ms. Drennan Dudley, Deputy National Cyber Director for Strategy and Budget, Office of the National Cyber Director. And last but not least, we have Cynthia Kaiser, Deputy Assistant Director with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. All right. So, Drennan, I'm going to pick on you first. So for the national...
gets picked on first?
I'm sorry?
The newbie gets picked on
Yes,
first?
absolutely. We're going to throw you in. For the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the first implementation plan was released last summer, and I know version 2 just came out today. Congratulations. What would you say are some of the key areas of your focus, and how would you assess things as progressing?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So it's hard to believe that the president signed the National Cybersecurity Strategy just a year ago in March. And since then, we have released 2 implementation plans. Very excited about that, so thank you for highlighting it. Also, just so great to be sitting on stage with esteemed colleagues, as you mentioned, because really the way the strategy gets implemented through the implementation plan is only by the actions of federal departments and agencies. And so all of the expertise that you see sitting on the stage right now is what makes cybersecurity for the United States. You know, there were 69 initiatives in the first implementation plan. It's a little bit novel, the implementation plan, because it was published. That's not always a common thing to do in federal government, but because cybersecurity is such a team sport, what we wanted to do is make sure that the roadmap was transparent for everyone. So publishing it with one lead federal agency, a timeline for completion, and a specific tasking was really important. It's hard to pick amongst the 69 activities that were in there. All of them are important, some, all with different due dates. But I think, just some key highlights are that, as you saw, Secretary Blinken was here yesterday, so we were very excited to hear, and I was just talking to Liesl, it was like a quite moving speech that he gave. It was really, really lovely and very inspiring. But the strategy that he mentioned, the international strategy, was one of the items in the implementation plan, so we're really excited to see that happen. CISA has worked hard on making sure that we have all sorts of different products and activities. I'm sure Eric will talk to many of those. Some best practices activity that comes out of CISA, so really good work happening there. And then the FBI, of course, has great news, even just this morning, as they do their disruption and dismantling campaigns and really expand the scale of that work. They had an indictment just this morning, so congratulations on that from all of the FBI's hard work. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention organizations like Department of Commerce, who aren't with us today, but really worked hard on standards. So there's just so much. I really encourage everyone to read through the implementation plan. It may look like a boring government document. There's lots of good nuggets in there. Do a Control F, find your favorite topics, and you'll see lots of great work sprinkled throughout there. As you mentioned, we did release the second version of the implementation plan. This is a regular activity. It will be an annual activity. So as people have ideas, we welcome them to bring them to us. One great idea that's in the new plan that everyone can read, it's online now, is related to, and this makes maybe cybersecurity a little more in touch with some of the activity that's happening. But following the Cyber Safety Board review recommendations, One of those that came out was making sure that we protect juveniles from entering a life of cybercrime, and so we have an activity directly related to that that DOJ is leading. So just really excited about all of the nuggets that are in there. I could talk about them, but I'm sure everybody else on the stage would like to brag about some stuff too, so I'll stop there.
Very good. Thank you, Drennan. Thanks for a strong opening here. The next question I'm going to toss over to Eric. So one of the National Cybersecurity Strategy's foundational elements is shifting roles, responsibilities, really rebalancing, if you will. From your perspective, what are some of the areas where you've seen this shift happen over the last year?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks to you all for coming. This is a great audience for a session on cyber strategy. So really, kudos to you all for joining. We're really grateful for it. One of the pretty extraordinary inflection points driven by the National Cybersecurity Strategy was a realization born through years of experience that simply focusing on enterprises, and by enterprises I mean victims, to do more, invest more, work harder is a failed strategy. And so the National Cybersecurity Strategy called out extremely clearly that our country and the technology community as a whole needs a fundamental rebalancing of accountability, where the providers of technology with the ability to protect victims at scale are incentivized and required to do so at every turn. When the strategy came out, this was pretty academic, right? I think a lot of us saw this and said, well, like that makes sense. Like obviously school districts and water utilities can't defend themselves against most adversaries. We do think that technology should be more secure, but what do we actually do? We've made extraordinary progress in not only driving this vision, but making it tangible. And so this began with a series of international guidance documents that CISA and our partners led over the past couple of years. But I think what's remarkable is the increase in intangibility of this change over the past year. Most tangibly, I think, federal contractors are now required to attest to the secure development of every software product provided to the federal government. There is now a cyber trust mark where the FCC is going to require providers of IoT solutions to have a seal of approval reflecting their adoption of security standards. And tomorrow at RSA, CISA is launching our Secure by Design pledge, where a significant number, not going to reveal it here, you have to watch tomorrow, a significant number of really big technology companies are going to publicly affirm their commitment to secure by design principles, which will therefore enable what we call secure by demand, which means that customers will then be able to go to their providers and say, you know what, we expect differently. We believe that security is a right, not a privilege, and we're going to drive the ecosystem towards that fundamental rebalancing that the strategy set forth 2 years ago.
Very good. Thank you, Eric. I'm going to toss the same question over to Cynthia with the FBI. So how would you say this rebalancing of roles and responsibilities has helped with the disrupting and dismantling threat actors?
So I think that the way we saw the cyber strategy was really amplifying the work and clarifying the work that FBI was doing in the space, and I think clarifying those roles in particular across the interagencies. So the FBI for several years now has been working towards imposing greater and greater costs on cyber adversaries, and doing that through a variety of different ways, and working especially with our partners in a joint sequenced way to be able to have those effects. At the same time, right a little before the National Cyber Strategy came out, we had the Joint Ransomware Task Force being implemented and developed, which is co-chaired with CISA, and where we're looking to see how can we come together in the space and really be able to make a difference in a more magnified way because we're working together. And I think that's where the strategy has had a huge impact, because while it's the same actions that are being done, there's more of them. And that's because there's clarity, that there's purpose, and there's an impetus behind some of those actions across the interagency. And so just to share a few numbers, our joint sequenced operations from this time last year are up over 100%. The threat advisories are up over 30%. And that's a pretty amazing numbers, and I think it goes towards where everybody knows and is working towards those same goals and objectives.
Thanks, Cynthia. Girl after my own heart. I love numbers. What gets measured gets done, always. All right, my next question, Liesl, is going to come to you. So the National Cybersecurity Strategy confronts the proliferation of the ever-growing offensive cyber capabilities that enable an expanding cadre of entities to threaten U.S. interests. There has been emphasis on the threat posed by this proliferation and also acknowledgement from the White House that in specific instances, these same capabilities can support national security objectives for the U.S. and allies. How do you see the State Department's work evolving in the coming years, especially since you do have client states who abuse these tools?
Well, easy question. But I guess let me just take the advantage of starting my answer by thanking Jenna for mentioning the rollout of the International Cyberspace and Digital Strategy yesterday. We were delighted, of course, that Secretary Blinken was the first sitting, acting Secretary of State to speak at RSA. So we'll take that. And it nicely coincided, of course, with the release of the strategy. So it really gave us an opportunity to highlight the kinds of things that we're talking about with regard to our implementation of Pillar 5 for the National Cybersecurity Strategy. If you heard it, you heard the Secretary talk about the great idea of digital solidarity and what that means for building coalitions, working with partners around the world to deal with things like misuse of tools like commercial spyware. So I'll come back to that in a second. The second thing is that big idea is then embodied by 3 principles: an affirmative vision, integration across the issues that we're grappling with, both on security, digital economy, and then on digital freedom and human rights. And then it has 4 strands of action that reflect the kinds of activities in which we're engaged. So promoting, building, and maintaining an open, inclusive, secure, and resilient digital ecosystem, aligning rights-respecting approaches to digital and data governance with international partners, advancing responsible state behavior in cyberspace by building coalitions and engaging partners, and strengthening and building international partner digital capacity, cyber capacity, including the capacity to build cybercrime. And so maybe if I can take that intro and answer your question and say that, we realize that there are a number of tools out there that can be misused by nation states or other actors. And so we take that integrated approach to cyberspace and digital policy and frankly, diplomacy very seriously, and want to broaden the coalitions of countries that are also concerned about the same kinds of misuse of commercial spyware. Firstly, we issued a joint statement that demonstrates the U.S. and our leadership in countering the proliferation and misuse of these tools. We know that they pose great risks to human rights and to national security, so we work with other countries to also take action to do that. And we have now 6 new states have joined this joint statement, but the government has also taken action to through an executive order to address these kinds of concerns. We pursued visa restrictions against those who misuse or financially benefit from the misuse of these tools. Commerce has blacklisted companies, and Treasury has imposed economic sanctions. So it's not something we do alone either at the Department of State. And these activities, these actions that we've taken have put bad actors on notice, while norms around the concerns about misuse emerge. So it's it's a constant and consistent effort to combine the message that we have on both.
Thank you, Lisa. Definitely a cross-agency collaboration initiative, and I like the emphasis on the diplomacy part, misuse, not abuse. All right, my next question, I'm going to throw it over to Drennan again. So when we talked about defending cyber-critical infrastructure, which, by the way, Eric, you're going to have a part of this. I'll start with Drennan. We're talking about cross-government cutting portfolios of industries. As a major driver of this pillar, what have you seen as an area where we have the most progress, and how have you, both ONCD and CISA, have engaged with the various sector risk management agencies to advance the implementation of this pillar? Drennan, I'll start with you.
It's so important that we're focusing on critical infrastructure, and I know Eric will have a lot to say about this too. I'll just highlight that part of the way we're making advancement is just talking about it and being clear about the fact that there is a public-private partnership here, and that as we move into additional and obviously hugely advanced use of digitizing just about everything, it doesn't naturally occur to people, either operators and owners who are implementing it every day, and everyday citizens who use services. Our reliance on cyber and cyberspace related to this activity. So just talking about it, and your question even alone just helps us make sure that we're getting all the information out there that we need to. One very specific thing related to that is in the new implementation plan version 2 that was released today. We added 3 new organizations, or let me say it this way, agencies that are in a lead role for implementing an initiative for the first time, which is really exciting. 3 of them are specifically related to critical infrastructure activity. And so I think that shows just the growth of making sure that while everybody's at sort of a different level of implementation as far as sector risk management agencies and bringing industries along on this, it's really important to be sharing best practices and to make sure that each one gets the attention that they need and sort of the skill sets and tools that they need as we're protecting our critical infrastructure across the board. It's just critical and key given the threat.
Absolutely, thanks. And Eric, anything to add?
Maybe just a few points building on that great synopsis. When we look at protecting critical infrastructure in this country, I think one through line is we're just making it way too easy on the adversary. And I will just call out as one example, a joint advisory that CISA, partners at FBI, and many other agencies across government released, I think last week, on pro-Russia hacktivists targeting very small water utilities across the country. And the way that these hacktivists are gaining access to operational technology systems that control water supplies isn't through a novel 0-day, isn't through an exploit that they've been working in a lab for years to develop. It's by using default passwords on internet exposed OT, but not just any default passwords that the vendor published in the public documentation for the products. And so if we are thinking about protecting the critical services upon which Americans depend, the first place for us to start is to actually look at how our adversaries are or could be gaining access to cause disruption, and then figure out where can we make investments that are going to increase the security waterline at scale. And so we know that many critical enterprises lack the resources, lack the maturity, lack the ability to sustain investment over time, but we also know that they are dependent on the same products and services horizontally across sectors. And so we do think that there's a lot of work that we can do together across the community to both help organizations make these investments, but also just to make life a little bit harder for the adversary that's going to have scalable impacts. One other point I would flag, just because you all are in a session about the National Cyber Strategy, so you love government doctrine, that's very clear. The US government recently released a new presidential directive called National Security Memorandum 22. You can look it up for your flights home if you're fascinated. But it is a really interesting document that somewhat reorients how the US government organizes itself to confront the challenge of protecting critical infrastructure. And one aspect of the memorandum that I'll call out is a requirement for each sector risk management agency with CISA to enter into a new risk assessment and risk management planning cycle for every sector. And that's really important because we know that each sector uses technologies in different and evolving ways. And we know that our adversaries are targeting not only each sector, but their common dependencies in evolving ways. And so the government now orienting around not a static approach of thou shalt do X, but an agile approach of risk management planning cycles. Our hope is that will enable us to be more agile against the threats we're facing.
Thank you, Eric. All right, my next question goes to Cynthia. So during a public hearing of the House Select Committee earlier this year, Director Wray briefed the American people on how the FBI has seen Chinese government actors hacking into American critical infrastructure in what assesses as preparation for a future battle space, one where China could disrupt or damage critical infrastructure through cyber means, taking what Eric said, but to a heightened level. Specifically, what are some of the things the FBI is doing here in the United States to help CISA and other sector risk management agencies disrupt and defend against such activities?
You know, I think there's not a greater example of the interagency working together towards a similar objective than some of our actions that we've taken over the last year to try to counter Volt Typhoon together. So a few aspects in which FBI is working towards this includes our incident response at the victim level. So when we're calling out our incident responders, commonly known as cyber action teams or CAT teams, they are going on site with the victim, taking inventory of what they know, and then bringing back all of that data to interagency teams who can look through it and then help identify and fuel what has become these two major cybersecurity advisories that have been put out that detail out exactly how the actors are using living off the land techniques, what types of techniques to look for, et cetera. But you know, it's not as easy as just kind of taking those guides and looking at your network. You need these teams that are, you know, behind the scenes looking at the data. I think my analyst called it like getting to geek out with the super geeks. You know, so it shouldn't. They were just having like these experts looking at it, and doing this like just big data analysis, finding the anomalies, looking across, so that they can really identify where these actors are. And I think that's really where then our interactions with CISA or sector risk management agencies came out, is being able to say either this group is being targeted, do you want to come with us on the victim notification? Do you want, or can we share what we learned here? Or how do we work together on putting these advisories out? There's that defensive standpoint. I think then from a more offensive standpoint, the FBI also conducted with several of its partners an operation to take down the infrastructure that these PRC actors were using to stage and hide their hand behind some of these activities. So using edge devices like small business home routers, et cetera, we were able to go through a court-authorized operation to conduct a way to remove PRC access to those devices and disrupt their ability to use that network to further conduct those type of activities. And those actions that the FBI takes alongside our partners, it impedes the actor, it delays them, it disrupts them, and it makes them have to focus internally instead of focusing on us.
That's great, thank you. Cynthia, I'm actually going to stay with you with the next question. The security of modern digital infrastructure, from telecommunications to power, falls to the ever-evolving role of private technology companies. How has the FBI prioritized the fostering of these public-private partnerships?
Well, I think just going more general about our public-private partnerships, there's two aspects to it. Number one, we're a victim-centered organization and always have been, and most of our work is going to revolve around assisting victims in that space. So assisting victims in the aftermath of an attack, knowing what's happening on their systems, helping them get back online, and then also taking what we learned from there and then providing it to the rest of the private sector so that they can defend and not become victims themselves. So there's that bucket. There's also that area where we're just increasing our interactions and ensuring there's a two-way flow of information between both partners. So you have the kind of larger companies that we're obviously having a lot of back and forth with because they have additional data that is going to amplify or enhance our operations and vice versa, but also that two-way flow of information when it comes to a victim response or an incident response or targeting, where we know and have the relationships in place that we can obtain the information from that targeted entity, and we can also provide them the information they need. And bringing all that together, it helps create this really great cycle of defense and response, and all of that's intended really to ensure that we're doing what we need to in the space to try to protect our private networks.
Thank you, Cynthia. My next question goes to Eric. So CISA plays a central role in enabling critical infrastructure owners and operators to defend themselves, speaking of public-private partnerships. Are there particular approaches that have gotten better results in one sector versus another?
You know, what we have found is critical infrastructure in our country is extraordinarily diverse, and it is diverse across sectoral verticals. It is also diverse within sectors. What we have found is the only way to scale to meet this challenge is to look for points of leverage that enable entities across sectors to lift up their investment, their security, and their resilience. And so we've really tried to do that in two ways. The first, harping on a common refrain for my role in this panel, is to recognize that there is a common technology base that underpins every single sector. That means two things. It means that if we can invest in making that technology base more secure and resilient, we are going to lift up every single sector. But it also means that there is a set of companies that has unique visibility into both threat activity and exploitable conditions affecting every sector. And so what we have found through work with partners like FBI, through fora like our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, is we can bring together organizations that have that horizontal layer of visibility and then better understand, for example, where actors like Voltyphoon are likely targeting and use that to drive progress across sectors. We also know that we have to leverage the communities that exist in our field. And so the ISACs, for example, remain absolutely essential resources to reach down market. Because we talk every day in government with the nation's largest energy companies, largest water utilities, largest telcos. Those are also the organizations that are most able to defend themselves. And so, in many ways, our investment is paradoxically weighted in the wrong direction, where we are working most with those who can most help themselves and least with those who can't. And so working with fora like the ISACs and other sectoral groups, we are able to scale out a bit, and also relying on our government field forces, whether CISA regional offices or FBI field offices, allows us to actually get out there into communities and make those touch points that, frankly, we can't scale from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Eric. Let's see, Liesl, I'm actually turn this next question over to you. Last year, we had numerous questions that touched on the war in Ukraine, how lessons learned from the invasion shaped the cybersecurity strategy and Ukraine's resilience in the face of cyber warfare. How did all that influence, if at all, the U.S. international cyberspace and digital policy strategy that you guys just released yesterday?
Well, it certainly wasn't the only influence, but it was a great influence and unfortunately a prime example of the kinds of things that entities face around the world with regard to cyber threats. And this one happens to be in a very, obviously an acute conflict. I think I probably talked about the lessons we learned trying to provide assistance to Ukraine in a very emergent way. We've been talking about foreign assistance. We have been talking about and doing foreign assistance or capacity building for countries around the world for many years. But this was a very, and including Ukraine. But this was a situation in which we needed to be able to deploy products and services very quickly, and we found that the mechanisms just weren't quite there for us to be able to do that in an agile way. So part of the influence of that in the strategy is this issue of providing capacity building and partnering in order to provide assistance, even in an emergent fashion, to countries that are in need. And also be able to look at it in a way that helps them to sustain their cyber defense over the long term. So we've done a couple of things. One is we found ways to work very directly with the private sector, some of whom were already on the ground in Ukraine, and cobble together ways to provide some assistance in a more rapid fashion. The second thing we did is we found a way to coalesce a coalition of countries who were similarly willing to provide assistance and have modeled that into something called the Tallinn Mechanism, which is a way to coordinate the donor countries to provide assistance to Ukraine. Not the name notwithstanding, certainly Estonia is a country that is involved in this, and they have someone on the ground in Kyiv to help with this coordination and ascertain from Ukraine what they need and engage on the ground. And then Poland is another country who has been organizing a lot of that coordination function sort of on the back end, as we would say. But other countries certainly are involved in the Tallinn Mechanism, and that is helping to provide that coordination mechanism that we learned we needed. The last thing I would say is we also learned that it helps to have a little bit more funding or a new mechanism for providing emergent response or foreign assistance. So I'll give you a number, $50 million. The Congress has authorized a new cyber, digital, and technology fund for us to be able to provide more agile, flexible, and hopefully timely response on the ground in situations like Ukraine. And they also just appropriated $50 million. So I hope those are ways that we are realizing already the lessons learned and the going forward we need to help countries like Ukraine.
Thank you, Liesl. Staying on the topic of war, FBI, Cynthia, can you speak to how the war has shaped your threat picture of the adversary and how that may have informed your support for CISA and critical infrastructure owners and operators to defend their systems?
Well, I think one of the main lessons from the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been that speed of attribution is possible. Mm-hmm. So, in the beginning, when we were looking at, the different things that were happening, things like Whispergate, et cetera, we were able to get to attribution using either our own technical sources or intelligence community sources, public attribution, within a matter of days. And I think, there is a lot of factors that go into attribution because it's more complicated than it was before, and really thinking about, publicly, how do we actually get this going? I think in the past it used to be really easy. It used to be like, okay, we know about an incident, we're going to respond to that incident, we're going to collect and evaluate and analyze all those indicators, and then we'll put out that information publicly when possible. And now it's like everything's happening all at once, and we need to get information out all at once. And so there's, a lot of hard conversations that we have to have inside the government about what is important here. Is country level attribution okay, or do we need more specificity, and that tension between speed and specificity. And I think that the Russia-Ukraine, within that context, we got it right. We got all that information out, we got it quickly, and that showed everybody within our space, that's making these decisions on all the other different programs, why it matters to be able to get that speed and why you would do that, and maybe, what you sacrifice along the way to do it. So I think it's really changed how we're approaching doing that type of work. And then that enables us to much more rapidly and in a much more refined way support CISA, sector risk management agencies, and just all of the private sector, and how we're able to get out that information, have those conversations, and not have it be a months-long deliberative process.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. I'm going to actually switch topics towards workforce. Drennan, I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about this one, so I'm going to let you go first. A challenge that all of us face is staffing, and in the federal workforce, this includes intense competition with private sector for cyber talent. I personally strongly believe that a piece of what draws top cyber talent into the federal space is the mission, which is not limited to the pillars or the strategic objectives of the national cybersecurity strategy. So, Drennan, I'll start with you. Give us your best shot of why should somebody come work for ONCD?
To work specifically at ONCD, I mean, everyone should get involved in the cybersecurity field in general, but at ONCD, I think one of the key things that if you bring to the table, you will be very happy working there, is thinking about how you build partnerships. As you've heard, every single person on the stage referred to someone else and working with them collaboratively. And our whole role is providing a platform when needed and when appropriate for agencies to do that. So it's all about partnerships. If you like bringing people together and you like making sure that you solve the sticky wicket problems, and so I'd say point 2 is we are really focused on the cyber hard problems. What is the stuff that we think we can't solve? And let's figure out how to solve it, because it's just so important to tackle those things. 10 years down the road, they're going to come to fruition, and they should come to fruition on the good guys' side, not the bad guys' side.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to go actually across the panel seating here. Let's see, Eric, what do you think?
I'll first note, just, there's no wrong door in government, right? I think my main point would be, cybersecurity is, wherever you are working, a national security and a national prosperity imperative, right? And so that is the case if you are working to defend an enterprise and industry. It is the case if you are working for any agency among those represented here and the myriad in the federal space that aren't. And so I would just encourage everybody, frankly, if you have one takeaway, either for your careers or those of your friends and colleagues and mentees, consider a stint in public service. I will reflect, certainly speaking for CISA, but also I think many other agencies as well. It used to be the case that the only path to a career in public service was to start when you finish college and then retire with a gold coin 30 years later. And that's fundamentally no longer the case. And so certainly, just speaking for my own agency, the vast majority of our team members come into CISA. They work some number of years, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They go out to the private sector, they learn a new experience, they gain a new perspective, and then ideally they come back in. And not only do we accept that, we encourage it, right? Because that is the sort of field we are in. I personally was in CISA's precursor agency, left for the private sector, came back in. And that is, I think, the model that we have to reflect if we are to recruit the kind of talent that we want to, and if we want to make federal service as welcoming and as frictionless as it needs to be.
Thanks, Eric. Liesl, what about you for State Department?
Well, I guess I would start by saying that that cybersecurity in the context of the State Department or my own career is not a technical field. It is a multidisciplinary field, and so there are any number of ways you can contribute to that mission, as Eric said, by being involved in the policymaking apparatus, or working abroad and engaging with foreign partners by being a cyber or digital officer in one of our embassies. If you heard the Secretary yesterday said we are aiming to have a trained cyber and digital officer in every embassy around the world, and we do have many of those already. We are doing training internally to make sure that our Foreign Service officers, but not only our chiefs of mission, our deputy chiefs of mission, and those of us that are based here in the U.S., based in Washington, have enough training to be able to talk about this issue in that integrated fashion that he laid out yesterday. This is not just a cybersecurity in a silo issue. This is part of a much broader brush of the ecosystem that we've all talked about today. So whether or not you want to work for our CISO or our eCISO field and help protect the State Department's networks, which are global, or you want to work in the policy field, it's a very multidisciplinary opportunity for people to join our side of the federal government.
Well said. And last but not least, Cynthia, the FBI.
So when we ask our highly technical folks, why do you stay? They give us two reasons. One is the unparalleled mission and what they're able to accomplish like within that. And then 2 is the type of work that they get to do. Where they get to be hands on keyboard, looking at like how to counter adversaries. They get the a lot of different training opportunities that they may not get elsewhere, and they get to work side by side on teams that include special agents and intelligence analysts, and like all the like as part of these like really great teams that are working towards the same to counter adversaries. And so that's where we really see why people stay in the FBI. But I also want to pull on a thread that Eric mentioned about that back and forth and that expectation of what we think people are doing when they come in. And I think especially we're a really competitive employer for folks that are starting off in their careers. Because of the training, because of the great amount of responsibility you get early on. And really, there's nothing wrong with making a difference in your 20s and money in your 30s and 40s. Like, we have to be okay, right, with having this back and forth and knowing that people are taking care of their families and the mission. And you get to take with you forever that you got to have a hand in some of these really amazing operations, just like the one we announced today.
Very good. Thank you, Cynthia.
Do you mind if I just add
No,
one
go
quick
ahead,
thing that I think is really important? Eric kind of picked up on this point, and everyone mentioned it. Like, no matter where you go into the actual cybersecurity field, one of the key things that we did was pull down some of the barriers to entry into the workforce. As Eric pointed out, it used to be that you had to get a 4-year degree, and we love 4-year degrees. We love colleges and universities. It's very important in education. It's not always required immediately when you are trying to enter into a field of cybersecurity. And so we took a look, along with OPM and OMB, Office of Personnel Management and Office of Management Budget, to notice that while we thought there was a law that was preventing people from actually, we thought we were going to have to go through this massive process to make sure that the 4-year college requirement didn't prevent people from entering service when they could. We realized it's actually a contractual thing, and so going bit by bit, agency by agency, making sure the procurement folks and hiring folks know that it's not actually a requirement to get into the field was really a key thing. So that came from yet another strategy, because you can't have too many strategies, but the workforce strategy that the Office of the National Cyber Director. So it's just so key that people get involved. And as Eric mentioned, any door that opens for you, and then come in and out, because the skill set and the sort of experience and knowledge that comes along with that is critical.
That's great. Thank you, Drennan. And I'll just put a plug in myself. I came from the private sector, didn't expect to actually work in the federal government as long as I did, and I've loved every single minute of it. It's not boring at all. Oh my God, probably overstimulated. So with that, I'm going to stop the structured questions for the moment. I want to open it up to the audience to see if anybody would like to ask questions of the panelists. If you have a question, there are 2 mics down each side of the hallway. The corridor here. Oh, y'all don't be shy now. All right, we have one.
Bill, careful.
Pardon me. Okay, thank you. First off, a lot of what we're hearing at this conference is about specific events, vulnerabilities, TTPs, thinking tactically and operationally. So yes, all the kidding aside, we do appreciate, or I appreciate, having a strategic conversation. So thank you all for today's panel. And I apologize, I'm setting up, but I don't have a question so much as a comment, mainly for AID Goldstein. I just wanted to comment on, my name is Terry, and I work in K-12. I think there's maybe 15 of us out of the 50,000 people that are here that are from K-12, so underrepresented. Some of the, going to in the vein of strategic, the secure by design that you mentioned, and was mentioned earlier this morning by Director Easterly, is something strategic. We know it's not going to happen overnight. You mentioned about tomorrow's event and so forth. I just wanted to make a comment that for those of us, whether you're a nonprofit, K-12, or wherever you're coming from that's maybe been underserved or under-resourced pretty significantly, it's changes like that, initiatives like that, CISA partnering with other agencies that are really going to have a disproportionately good and beneficial impact to organizations like ours. We're serving and supporting, the millions of students across the nation that are our future. And so we talk about, there's a lot of sessions on workforce, right? We need to make sure that we're getting folks in the pipeline and career and technical education, but there's not a lot of talk or resources about protecting those kids while they're going through that process. So anyways, just more of a comment of thanks and appreciation that a program like that will have benefits from a whole of nation approach, but absolutely more so for those like us. So thank you.
Yep. And
Awesome.
thank you for that comment. I would just offer it was not unintentional that the first tangible step that was taken as part of the Secure by Design initiative was an event hosted by the White House where we brought together K-12 education technology vendors and actually got them to commit to a Secure by Design pledge almost a year before the pledge that will announce tomorrow. And so very much recognizing that we have a lot of work to do, but if we can get the tech providers to help, it'll make a real difference.
And if I might just add also in the implementation plan, second version that just came out today, I mentioned that we have 6 new federal agencies that are taking the lead for an initiative. One of them is the Department of Education, specifically to create a subsector council for education entities. So hopefully next year it won't be 15 of you, it will be 50 of you, because this group has brought everybody together and coordinated and making sure that all of the information that needs to get shared gets shared, and that so global issues like you're mentioning have a place to live and get solved. So really appreciate the comment.
Thank you. Sir.
Hi. First of all, is this on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for your panel. So I wanted to say first to Cynthia, I used to be the state CISO for Montana, and last year I got to participate in the FBI CISO Academy. And so when you're talking about public-private partnerships, that was a fantastic program. I'm always amazed it doesn't get as more press than it does. But the partnerships and learning about the capabilities and all the cooperation that the FBI does, so many things every day that nobody's even aware of that they're doing to hold groups and private sectors together is amazing. So thanks for that academy, and if anything you can do to make it so we can go a second time, I really appreciate that. And then I just wanted to say something to Eric. So my current job now is with Center for Internet Security. So we run the MS-ISAC and the EI-ISAC in K-12s and the MS-ISAC. If you haven't joined that, go ahead and join that. I just want to say thank you so much for the support that CISA gives us, especially through the JCDC, the funding. So I'm focused on cyber underserved, state, local, tribal, and territorial. Would not be able to do it without CISA and the cooperation and leadership that you guys give us. So thank you so much for that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So no question, another comment.
All right, we'll take it.
Well, thanks to you both.
Yes.
So if I can, just elaborate on the CISO Academy portion of that. So the FBI does run several times a year a group of CISOs coming to Quantico, getting to hear from government leaders, having like very candid, Chatham House rules conversations about cyber incidents, what they're facing. We learn as much from them as I think they learned from us, and we get to really have this great cohort moving forward of these CISOs who understand the mission. Then we bring in other government leaders as well, and it's one of the best things we do is return on investment for the FBI, because we get to know all of you and all of the things that CISOs are going through, like at a much more intimate level. So thank you for that shout out, and so I just wanted to kind of give that overview.
Thank you. All right, I think that's a wrap. Everybody, please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.